Hi, I'm Steve Young from Midas. We're here at Sweetwater today to talk about the new Midas M32 digital mixing console, a 40 input, 25 mix bus digital mixing console that has some amazing features we're going to tell you about. The M32 features a 40 input mix engine, and the way we access those 40 inputs and break that down is we have 32 microphone preamps built directly on the console. Those are accessible in 2 fader bank layers. We access inputs 1 through 16 here, 17 through 32 on the second layer. Our third layer gives us 6 additional inputs, which are line level inputs through tip ring sleeve connectors on the back side of the console, showing up here in the first 6 inputs. Then we have 2 USB returns from our 2-track USB recorder we'll talk about here in just a moment. And then we have 4 stereo effects returns assigned to that third layer. Navigating the console is very simple, and it's very intuitive, especially for anyone who's come from the analog world, thinking about a traditional channel strip. The way we access the various controls on an individual input channel, we'll go back to channels 1 through 16, we select the channel, and our 7-inch daylight viewable screen here instantly comes up and shows us a brief overview of the various controls and DSP functionalities for that particular channel. To access and actually engage a particular function, we always look for the orange lights. In the case of the preamp section, where everyone typically starts here, we hit view and we've got a full graphical view of what's going on with our preamp section. We can engage 48 volt phantom power, we can reverse polarity, we can engage an adjustable high pass filter. That's all your preamp section. So you've set the preamp on your channel, you're now going perhaps to the dynamics and gate section. Hitting view shows a nice graphical interface of the gate threshold. To engage the gate, again, we look for the orange button. Orange button engages that particular function. Likewise on our compressor, we can view that. Hit the comp button to engage it and adjust our various thresholds and so forth for that particular DSP function right there. Next, our equalizer, very powerful equalizer section. So for any given channel, we have 4 bands of full parametric EQ with some various shelving. We have cut, shelf, variable EQ, parametric EQ filters available at our disposal to really set the tonal balance of the individual channel. Now, in regards to mix buses, people also call them auxiliary sends. Our terminology, we use mix buses. And there are a total of 16 mix buses on the M32. You can swap those in 2 bus groups to be also subgroups for DSP processing through the effects rack, which we'll show here in just a moment. Again, we have selected a channel, in this case channel 1. We hit view and we've got a nice graphical interface of what's going on with those mix bus sends. So 1 through 4 are on a layer here, 5 through 6, 9 through 12, 13 through 16. An easy way to pull them up, just like you'd think of individual knobs on a channel strip. Additionally, we have a fader flip mode, so if we were addressing an individual bus send, we hit flip fader, we can engage that send and then bring those channels up accordingly to contribute to that send. So there's a couple of different ways to access those mixed bus sends. Lastly, as you're thinking like you'd be going down an analog channel strip, the last section is our main bus assignment. We click that here. The mixer can operate in left, center, right mode or left, right plus a mono bus, and that assignment is taken care of here. Again, looking for the orange buttons, and you can adjust the pan and level of your center channel right here off this section. Moving on to the master section here. Master section is also very accessible. We've got 4 layers in the master section. Group DCA 1 through 8 is the first layer, and DCAs are great. Think of them as you might consider using subgroups or traditional VCAs. In a DCA group, it's very easy to set up and assign. In this case, we have some pre-assigned on this show file, drums in 1, guitars in 2, vocals in 3, etc. To select the channels that you're going to assign to a DCA, simply hit the DCA select and select the channels individually to contribute to that DCA. Gives you a master level for those channels for submixing and overall level control purposes. The next 2 buttons here are to access the master outputs for those mix buses that we talked about earlier. Bus 1 through 8, master is set up here. I have these pre-configured as monitor sends, 1 through 6, 7 and 8 as effects sends, and we'll go through the effects here in a moment. 9 through 16, we have an extra reverb here, a bunch of open mix buses, which, as I mentioned, could be swapped out in 2 bus groups to be sub-mixes instead for processing through the effects rack. And then 16 we have set up as a subwoofer feed. So that's bus 9 through 16. And then the last section here is a matrix output, which is assignable to the main output. Each output on this console has up to 500 milliseconds of delay, and each of these matrices has 4-band parametric EQ at your disposal as well. The EQ section on the matrix output is slightly different than any of the other output sections in the fact that we can also set up some pretty advanced filtering. We could even do something as crazy as build a stereo 3-way crossover with 24 dB per octave Linkwitz-Riley filters to create a stereo 3-way system, this being your highs, your mids, and your lows. And as you see there, these subgroups can also be linked in stereo pairs, which is a pretty efficient way to do those type of things, like crossover in this case, which is an extreme example, front fills, under balcony fills, and keep in mind you have up to 500 milliseconds of delay built right into the console. Moving on to the effects section of the M32, it includes an 8-slot stereo virtual effects rack. The first 4 slots here on this side are assigned for effects such as reverbs, delays, and other non-dynamic effects. You can also do compressors and limiters on this side. And the left-hand side is set up primarily for equalizers that would be assigned to your mix buses or main output section. Returns for these 4 slots, again, as we mentioned earlier, they're on the 3rd layer of the channel strip, so all 4 of your effects returns from these slots show up directly on that 3rd layer. Again, these are assigned either as inserts or as side chains, so they can be assigned directly to a channel, pre or post fader, pre or post EQ, or you can set them up with your mix buses as you would traditional effects sends. So the first 4 here return into the 3rd layer there on the channel strips. These last sections here, typically I set them up for equalizers. In a generic festival show file setup as we have here today, I've got 6 monitor sends. Each of these is assigned a 3rd octave EQ. These are stereo 3rd octave EQs, or 2-channel, I should say, 3rd octave EQs. So we have 1 monitor mix assigned to a discrete 3rd octave EQ in that scenario, plus a main EQ for our left-right house mix. That's just one example. There's lots of different effects built into the M32. The 7-inch day viewable screen here gives you lots of opportunities to see what's going on within the console at any given time. One of my favorite screens here that gives a very global overview of what's going into and out of the console here in the metering section. It allows us to see instantaneously what's happening per channel, per mix bus, what's happening with our auxiliary sends and auxiliary returns. Very intuitive. Also for routing, we talked about all 32 microphone preamps being accessible directly on the backside of the console. We also have 2 AES-50 ports, and these go to our external stage boxes. Each AES-50 port is 48 channels of bidirectional audio, and your routing for the stage boxes versus the local inputs and the card inputs, which we'll talk about here in a moment, are located right here in this routing screen. Setup gives you lots of options for things like safe scenes, as well as just regular global adjustments to the console, like adjustments to your scribble strips. Scribble strips we should mention too. The scribble strips give you lots of great icon capabilities and labeling. It eliminates the white tape on the console. You can name them yourself, either directly on the console or with our offline editor. It's a very simple and intuitive process. You've got icons for instruments and lots of naming conventions, plenty of room to do what you might need to do there. There's also preset effects libraries. So if you've got an entry-level operator, a novice operator who doesn't necessarily know what a proper EQ curve might be for a particular instrument, you have a library of those effects at your disposal, a lot of very good ones that are easily assignable to channels for those applications. We also have 6 mute groups on the consoles, on the console that can be recalled here and assigned here, and gives you overall operation of all those functions with a set of navigation controls here, as well as the digital encoders. Finishing up on the right-hand side of the console, we have our monitoring section, which allows us to access the monitoring screen here. Again, hitting view, we can monitor any mix bus or main output very quickly. Talkback section here, we have a Talkback A and a Talkback B with an internal microphone as well as a built-in an external microphone connection, and this can be routed again also to any mix bus for Talkback scenarios. Our scene control section right here, as we hit view, this is also very intuitive to set up and easy to operate. It lends itself nicely to theatrical applications as well. The scene memory, we've got 100 shows each with 100 scenes at our disposal. Those can be saved locally directly on the console, or we can also access them through our USB connection over here. Finishing up here on the right-hand side of the console as we move on down here. This is our continuous controller and assignment section. What you have here are 4 sets of encoders and also 8 buttons. And those controls, both the encoders and the buttons, are available for recall in 3 different sets. And you can do a lot of different things. Any of the navigation that we typically do with the buttons on the navigation screen or elsewhere on the console can be instantly recalled here instead. And so for the type of functionality that you're doing on a regular basis, like taking a look at perhaps the lead singer's microphone, or your primary reverb, or your monitor EQs, those can be quickly assigned and recalled over here. So in this case, just for our example here, we have the recall of our primary reverb, and then we have the muting of our primary reverb right here on these 2 buttons. We also have our room size and our room decay for that particular reverb assigned right here on these 2 corresponding encoders. Likewise, the next 2 buttons I have set up to recall my primary delay and to mute my primary delay. Again, I don't have to go to the navigation screen for calling up the effects. I can do it right here. And likewise, we have our delay time and our delay feedback, 2 very common things that you would navigate to make adjustments for on a real-time basis. The M32 is set up for recording out of the box. There's a couple of different ways that we can go about recording. We have a simple 2-track recorder built directly in the console, which records WAV files directly to USB. We hit the view. We've got a very traditional transport control section here. You can assign anything to those 2 tracks. So if it's a house of worship application, you're wanting to record just the pastor's mic simply to a USB for broadcast, you can do it that way. You can take any mix bus, any main output, any direct channel output, and have that show up on the USB recorder. You can access every input and output of the M32 either remotely through our AES-50 bus and stage boxes, but you also have all of this I/O for full functionality of the console built directly on it. So if you're an existing house of worship with traditional copper snake already out there with multi-pair, you can swap out your traditional analog desk, plug this directly in, and you're good to go. 32 microphone pre's on professional XLR connectors, 6 auxiliary inputs, with the last one allowing you simple RCA connections as well for iPad input perhaps at front of house, and likewise auxiliary outputs also on balanced tip ring sleeves. Now those outputs, as well as these inputs and the master section, are completely soft patchable within the console. So if we want individual physical inputs to show up on different channel strips, we can do that. If we want our various mix bus or main outputs to show up on the XLR output sections here 1 through 16, and or the auxiliary outputs over here on the tip ring sleeves, we can do that simply through the patching capabilities of the console. AES-50 A and B outputs, which work with our digital snake system, Ultranet, which works with our sister company, and the P16 personal monitoring system. The Ultranet bus is completely separate from the other output assignments. You can create 16 outputs from the console, and those can be channel strip outputs, mix bus outputs, main outputs, whatever you might need, and those live on a separate bus here through Ultranet. And with our P16 personal monitoring system, that allows the musician to take those sources and create their own monitor mix. Very intuitive, very cool feature. MIDI I/O, as we mentioned, over here in the remote control section, Ethernet for our remote control. You simply hook up a wireless router to the Ethernet port. I recommend creating your own hidden personal network for control of the console. It, of course, could also be set up with a wireless access point on an existing network. But with the Ethernet control and a wireless router, you've got access at that point to our iOS remote control applications for iPad and also for the iPhone and other iOS devices, as well as a real-time editor and control function with a Linux-based software program, Windows-based, or PC-based control. One of the few manufacturers that offer all those different platforms for control of our digital mixing consoles. One piece that we'll talk about here, again, the Ethernet port allowing you to do the iOS functionality with your iPad for control. It's very intuitive. It's easy to mix monitors separately from front of house. Any access that you have to the controls and functionality on the surface, you also have on the iPad application. So it allows two operators, a monitor person, to be up on stage making adjustments to mixed bus sends and equalization for the monitors, completely separate from what the front of house operator is doing, but it's all in real time. So each person can see the other operator's actions on the console or the iOS application. This has been a quick overview of the Midas M32. If you've got any additional questions, please call your Sweetwater sales engineer. They'll explain everything in much more detail and give you all the information that you need on this console.